How full has every championship stadium been this season? Let's talk about it. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've taken each championship club's average attendance so far this season. We've stacked that up against how much the stadium actually holds to work out who's got the fullest and emptiest stadiums on average. If you do going to enjoy today's video, make sure to go ahead and drop a like. What do you make of your club's attendances as well? Let me know down below. But without any further ado, let's jump in. So unsurprisingly, coming in at the bottom of this table, we do have Blackburn Rovers. They're only filling 52.5% of their stadium on average, with an average attendance this season of 16,450 fans. Now these figures do include away fans as well, so take that into account while we go through this video. In fairness to Blackburn, their average attendances have gradually been growing over these last 5 years, and their average attendances this season are actually the highest they've had since they were in the Premier League, so shows they're maybe going in the right direction in terms of building back up that core fan base. But still, on average, they've got the emptiest ground in the league. Slightly above Blackburn, we've got Cardiff, who on average are filling 57% of their stadium. They are attracting weekly crowds of just shy of 19,000, but because of how big that stadium actually is, you do get a lot of empty seats at Cardiff. Now their average weekly attendances have actually dipped this season compared to last season, probably as a consequence of Cardiff being bit more inconsistent this time around. Their attendances peaked in the 2018/19 season when they were in the Premier League and they were getting over 31,000 in on a weekly basis, but since they've been back in the Championship, their attendances have been dwindling. Unfortunately for me, in 22nd place, we've got my team Preston North End. Now, to be fair to North End, there is quite a big bump up between the bottom two, Cardiff and Blackburn, and Preston. On average this season, we filled 71.7% of our stadium with weekly crowds of just over 16,700. Now, in terms of attendance figures at North End, they have been gradually rising over the last 4 or so seasons. So that is quite good to see, but obviously it is worth stressing the amount of away fans that come to any given game at Deepdale does have a big implication on how many fans are in the stadium. You know, we give the away fans about 5,500 tickets, and if they can fill out that whole end behind the goal, they're given all those tickets. So that obviously has quite a big influence on how many fans North End are getting in there on a weekly basis. But good to see our average attendances are gradually rising, albeit because of how big Deepdale is, it's still one of the emptier grounds in the league. 21st on this list, we've got Swansea. Despite actually having a lower average attendance than Preston, they're slightly higher on this list because they're filling a bigger proportion of their stadium, because the Liberty has a slightly smaller capacity than Deepdale. So on average this season, Swansea been selling 73.1% of their ground. Obviously that figure does include away fans as well. In 20th place on this list, we've got Sheffield Wednesday. Despite having the 7th largest average attendances in the Championship, they rank fairly low down on this list, sheerly for the fact that Hillsborough is such a big stadium. On average, they're only filling 73.9% of that ground. Now, I have taken into consideration the fact that Hillsborough is working at a reduced capacity at the moment. You know, when it's fully operational, everything's open, that ground can hold around 39k, but at the moment that's been reduced to around 34,000. One thing that really hinders Sheffield Wednesday, and I feel like their crowds, is just the fact of how expensive tickets are there. They've got some of the most expensive season tickets in the Championship, and I can't help but feel like if they were a bit more affordable, they'd be getting a lot more fans in the ground. A similar sort of thing applies to Middlesbrough as well. They're 19th on this list, despite having one of the bigger average attendances in the Championship. The Riverside is one of the bigger grounds as well. On average, they're filling 74.5% of that ground. And in a very similar way to Sheffield Wednesday, Middlesbrough also have some really expensive tickets. Some of the most expensive season tickets in the Championship you'll find at Middlesbrough, and I can't help but feel like that will have a negative knock-on effect for average attendances. Coming in 18th place, we've got Millwall, who have brought in crowds of just over 15,000 on average this season. Now, the average attendance figures have dipped off quite a bit since last season. I believe Millwall hit a record figure last season for average attendances, where they were averaging around about 16,500 fans, which was their highest number since 1953. Since that point, attendances have dipped a little bit this season, I suppose on the back of what's been a bit of an inconsistent year for Millwall, but 74.6% of that ground they're filling on average. 17th on this list, we've got Stoke City with average attendances of around about 22,800. That's 76% of the ground they're filling on average. Now, fair play to Stoke. Since COVID, average attendances at the Bet365 Stadium have gradually been increasing, which maybe you wouldn't have expected with how inconsistent that club's been over these last few years. Obviously, attendance figures peaked while the club was in the Premier League, and they've not really come close to matching those figures since. But yeah, since COVID, gradual attendances have been creeping up for Stoke, which I thought was interesting. Coming in 16th place, we've got the Sunderland fans in at the Stadium of Light. Now, it goes without saying, Sunderland have by far and away the biggest fan base in the Championship in terms of how many fans are packing into that ground on a weekly basis. They're getting crowds of over 38,800 on average, but as a result of the Stadium of Light being by far the biggest ground in the Championship, it does mean they're only filling 79.8% of that ground on average. The Stadium of Light at its very max capacity, holding just over 48,700 fans. Do very well to be packing out a ground like that in the Championship week in, week out. In 15th place, we've got Bristol City with average attendance figures of just over 22,000. Now, that is a slight drop off from what they were getting last season, but only very marginal. That's on average 81.9% of the ground at Ashton Gate that Bristol City are filling out. Next up, we've got Hull City. They're in 14th on this list with crowds of just over 21,000. That's 82.7% of that ground they are filling. Now, say what you like about Hull's ownership, and since these new owners have come in and how chaotic some of the footballing decisions maybe have been, from a purely attendance point of view, Hull City have seen absolute surges in the amount of fans coming on a weekly basis over these last few years. If you go back to the 2021/22 season, Hull were only getting average crowds of just over 12,800 compared to the amount of fans they're getting in that ground now. It's absolutely night and day, and that's only over the course of a few seasons. Next up, we've got the Coventry fans, who have one of the most complicated histories in terms of average attendances when it comes to ownership issues of the stadium, having to temporarily move grounds and things like that. But yeah, they are getting really good attendances now, over 27,000 on average, and it is a really big stadium there, obviously at Coventry. On average, they're filling 83.4% of that ground, but you compare that to the days in League One sometimes where they weren't even getting 10,000, yeah, they've absolutely exploded in terms of getting more fans in on a regular basis. Slap bang in the middle of this table, we've got QPR, who are filling 84.2% of that ground on average. Now, obviously, QPR's average attendances peaked while they were in the Premier League, but even since being relegated back to the Championship, average attendances haven't really dipped off that much. It is one of the tighter and smaller grounds in the Championship, Loftus Road, so QPR fans don't have that many problems with filling up the vast majority of it. Coming in 11th on this list, we have got Sheffield United, who have had the 4th largest average attendances in the Championship, but because of the size of Bramall Lane, they have been hampered a little bit on this list. Attendances have dipped off ever so slightly from last season, which you'd expect, obviously, when Sheffield United were playing in the Premier League, but generally speaking, I think most Blades fans have got very good value for money, considering the amount of wins they've seen at home so far this season. Derby have seen a bump in their average attendance compared to last season when they were in League One, which you would expect. There in the top 10 of this list, on average filling 86.5% of that stadium. And fair play to Derby, because even in League One they were averaging over 27k, which is absolutely huge. On average in the Championship this season, Derby have had the 3rd largest attendances, which is, yeah, absolutely massive. Watford have seen their home crowds been boosted up a little bit from last season. On average, they're filling out 89.8% of that ground. To be honest, ever since 2015, Watford's average attendances have been very consistent. Over the last 10 years, they've never dipped below 18,000 fans on average. Marginally higher than Watford on this list, we've got Burnley, who are filling out 89.9% of that ground at Turf Moor, and I mean, Burnley fans have probably had a bit of a unique perspective on this season, to be honest with you. Obviously fighting for automatic promotion, but entertainment value-wise, Burnley fans maybe haven't got great value for money at Turf Moor this season with the amount of goalless draws that fan base has seen, but they're still packing it out most weeks, in fairness to them. In 7th place, we've got Oxford United. Despite having the smallest average attendances in the Championship, they actually rank fairly well on this list because the Kazam only has a capacity of around 12,000 1,500. Based on their average attendances this season, that means they're selling out 90.4% of that ground, so there aren't many empty seats left over. But into the top 6 we now go. In 6th place, we've got the Plymouth Argyle fans selling out 90.9% of that ground on a weekly basis. The vast majority of home seats are usually taken. Obviously, away fans travelling to Home Park will impact these figures a little bit. And yeah, fair play to the Plymouth fans. Along with being some of the best at home, they're also some of the best travellers in the league as well, given their massive distances of the country that fan base needs to travel. And in what has been, let's be real, a real turgid season for Plymouth so far, their support hasn't really wavered during that time in terms of the numbers they get in that ground on a weekly basis. Coming in 5th place, we've got the West Brom fans in at the Hawthorns. They're selling out 92.9% of that ground, and I've got to say, West Brom fans are probably some of the most consistent in the Championship. I was taking a look at their average attendance figures, and if you go all the way back to somewhere like 2007, there's barely a fluctuation in that time. You'll get the odd 1,000 or two more or less here and there per season, but generally speaking, West Brom have been really consistent with their attendance figures, so fair play for that. Coming in 4th place, we've got the Leeds United fans. They've got the 2nd biggest average attendance in the Championship, and on average, they're selling out 95.6% of that ground. Obviously, away fans will be factored into that figure. Only Sunderland have a higher average attendance than Leeds in the Championship, and I mean, based on those figures, Leeds could definitely have a stadium expansion at Ellen Road, and I think it would be justified with the amount of home fans they could get into that ground, but they've just been pipped to a place in the top 3. And coming in 3rd place, we've got the Norwich City fans in at Carrow Road. They're selling out 96.6% of that ground on a weekly basis, and similar to what we were saying about West Brom before, the Norwich attendance figures over the last sort of 20 years have barely fluctuated whatsoever, no matter if they've been in League One, the Championship, or the Premier League. Generally speaking, you get the same amount of fans packing out of that ground on a weekly basis. So yeah, fair play. They have got probably one of the most loyal support bases in the Championship based on those figures. They've also got one of the bigger average attendances as well at just over 26k this season. Coming in 2nd place on this list, we've got the Luton Town fans in at Kenilworth Road, filling out 96.7% of that ground despite having the 2nd smallest average attendance in the Championship. Luton are 2nd on this ranking based on how small Kenilworth Road actually is. Now, you'll do well to find a home seat in the home end. Most weeks they're packing that out, obviously. Away fans can fluctuate a little bit going to Kenilworth Road, which maybe does bring that figure down ever so slightly, but Luton fans haven't had the easiest of rides over these last couple of years. They didn't see that many wins in the Premier League last season, and now they've been thrust straight into a relegation battle in the Championship this time around, but still got a very loyal supporter base behind them. But coming out on top of this list, it is Portsmouth, who are filling the biggest percentage of their stadium. 97.7% of that ground has been filled on average this season, with average attendances of over 20,200. Now, speaking of loyal fan bases, Portsmouth are definitely up there. Even when the club was in the absolute pits and they were down in League Two, they were still attracting crowds of over 16,000 on average. I'd imagine most of the away ends this season have been fairly full at Portsmouth as well, because I'm sure a lot of Championship fans who haven't previously had the opportunity to go to Portsmouth away have been looking to tick that one off this season. But they have managed to make Fratton Park into a bit of a fortress this time around. The vast majority of their points this season have come at home, and it's because of that fan base which is obviously roaring them on. So on average, they do have the fullest ground in the Championship, so fair play to Portsmouth fans for that. But there you guys have it. That will now wrap it up for today's video. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you found this one interesting, do leave a like and leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Other than that though guys, thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you all in the next one.